All right, man. We are rolling. It's great to be doing this. I'm really glad that you reached out, and like you said, it was a long time coming. We both couldn't make the second round at a different point, and here we are, man. So, how have you been?
Yeah, great to reconnect with you. I've been good, and yeah, I enjoyed our initial conversation online and our pod, and just staying in touch over the last couple of years. But yeah, I've been good, man. I think that the things are speeding up in the world, even across the Atlantic. It's not just in America; it's happening with you guys as well. And I think we were just talking about it earlier about how like spirituality and spiritual philosophy is quite the antidote to the chaos. It's now's really the time to practice. Now is really the time to meditate. Now is really the time to put the phone in the drawer and journal. Now is really the time to try that meditation course that you were considering over the last few years. So rubber is meeting road.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's like life has given us all of the conditions right now to either out of necessity to get on the practice, or to
Mhm.
put the practice to its use. Um,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, it's also you're in the UK,
yeah.
which I am a big fan of, despite there was a war a couple centuries ago. Besides the Revolutionary War, um, we I think Americans and British the British people are very close these days, and I'm extremely British background ethnoculturally, um, and I love the music, and I love the art and the writers, and sadly, it's not going so well over there either. I'm sending my heart and my empathy to the British citizenry who are being arrested for saying I'm against genocide, and like scary, like like America's off the rails, but like that is even crazier almost in some ways than some of the things we're doing. I mean, it's not a competition, right? I mean, I think we win a lot of the crazy contests these days, but I am sad to see these elderly senior citizens at the park that are protesting for Gaza, and they're being handcuffed. And it's like an old lady in a wheelchair. She's holding a sign that says like "Free Palestine" or something, and the cops are like, "You can't say that." And you guys don't have the First Amendment, so but Trump is trying to throw that one in the trash. The First Amendment in America is freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to peaceably assemble. So it's pretty good. I'm proud of that one. But it seems like anyone that it seems like there's a level of people in power just they aren't crazy about those those opportunities for people. Sabri, one thing we could talk about is like, and this is there's so much nuance to this. I'm a little like I'm hesitant to just like write a post about it without some kind of more extended explanation because I don't want to dismiss the seriousness of this moment. But I also can't help but notice, and you're a big reader, in history, all the mystics, all the saints of the spiritual paths deal with corrupt rulers. Pretty much all of them. I mean, Jesus was not a great governmental body during his life. He was murdered by the state. Um, you know, Mansur al-Halaj is a famous Sufi saint who danced to the gallows in chains. Kabir dealt with crazy both Hindu establishment and Muslim establishment. Both of them were trying to kill him. And centuries later, they both love him.
Mm.
He's he's revered in both Hinduism and Islam. and yet during his life he was on the move because he was constantly being hunted by those two very groups of people. So, it's kind of like I said, I don't want to be like, oh, all the mystics, but at the same time, all the mystics did deal with this, I don't know. Hope that's
Yeah,
useful.
absolutely. Yeah, and Socrates,
Totally. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's no shortage. Yeah. Yeah. How dare you question things? What are you doing? Inventing
Cor- corrupting the youth, asking
questions.
them to ask questions.
Corrupting you. Right, right. How dare you invent a new form of dialogue based on sincere curiosity and understanding?
Mm.
You must die. I mean, all you can do is laugh at how preposterous the juxtaposition is. So, I mean, Zhuangzi, I'm a huge fan of Zhuangzi, who was an ancient Chinese poet. Um, sometimes he's pronounced Chung Su. Ram Dass called him Chung Su, but it's Zhuangzi. Anyway, Zhuangzi, he was a ancient Chinese poet, and he writes about uh, Taoism, so the nature of the cosmos unfolding and the beauty of the kind of the synchronicities of life. And he's the second pillar of Taoism alongside Lao Tzu, um, but he is a little more political. He's a few hundred years later than Lao Tzu and Tao Te Ching, and so he's in the world. He calls out corrupt politicians. He has a great poem which I posted a few months ago. I should repost it, about how he said. I'm paraphrasing the idea of it, but essentially he talks about how a thief who steals things, who steals a box of goods or something like that, will hang. But if a general invades a country and wins the war, they're the they're the new leader, and they're in charge of the courts, and they're hailed as these heroes, and they did the exact same thing. Um, and so it's how much can you steal to to jump the threshold of petty thieves to becoming the founding leader of the new state. And he was a courageous. There's a lot of courage to make those comparisons, but yeah, it's just more proof that this is kind of how the world works. And I think some of the comments on these kinds of ideas are like, well, but there's never been nuclear warheads, and now there's biological attack, and so, there's always something. There's always going to be something, and I don't want to downplay the dangers, because I do. What I'm not trying to do is say don't worry about it, but what I am trying to do is say don't panic.
Yeah, I mean, what good does a panicked reaction do? Before we hit record, I was saying that I feel like I'm in a place where I feel so deeply calm and grounded and at peace in myself. But it feels like, well, if we want to show up to the world that is chaotic, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people don't realize that, meek, more etymologically, was used as a term for war horses that would remain calm in the chaos and that could still follow instruction. Well, right now, the chaos is happening. Like, can we be calm in the chaos rather than chaotic in the chaos? And having that time just each morning, just to go inward and close my eyes and find that place of just wholeness, groundedness, just here. It's like, okay. And there's a good place to show up from. Um, just it's so interesting with all the things that are going on now, because I think a lot of people are so often trying to look at what needs to change in the paradigm, rather than taking like a almost like a meta paradigmatic view of what's going on. It's almost like come out of the paradigm to view the paradigm in and of itself, almost like the difference between like cognition and a metacognitive awareness. um, and that's just something I've kind of often look at, whether it's, the whole political divide it's kind of falling into this dichotomized, polarized way of looking at things rather than that, almost like the Hegelian, what's the synthesis rather than thesis and antithesis. What's the synthesis, or what's the actual philosophia? What's the love of wisdom, where the two opposing sides can actually come together in conversation in good faith, that if we have differing opinions, it's like, hey, what would happen if there's something you know and there's something I know and they're different things? What could we actually birth together, rather than this philo-Nikeia, this love of victory, which is the kind of the paradigm that we seem to be in. So that's something that I've been kind of contemplating recently, is that so much of it seems to be trying to solve the problem within the paradigm that it's created.
Yeah, beautifully put. Yeah, it's, I mean, it feels like tribalistic kind of relic, it's like primordial residue, right, of the ancients. And although apparently I'm also learning that there's been emerging scholarship around the history of civilization, in that this kind of viewpoint that we were these, tribes and even species in some ways kind of at war constantly until we, you know began agriculture, um, might not be quite as accurate. We might have been actually more cooperative in the ancient past. So that would invalidate my metaphor there. But yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I think the Hindus also have a great image of the wheel, right? It's the if you're on the wheel itself, even if you're on the spokes, you're spinning uncontrollably. But it's only in the center of the wheel that you're able to withstand its motion in a way that is useful and transcendental and yet embodied. I think that's really the dance, Sabri, is how can we not be dismissive of these challenges, and alongside of that, be present for them in a very deep way. And I think that there's actually even a level, to your point around the synthesis, I think there's this level of like transcendental value that benefits the game. Benefit, you have to kind of, it's a Neo in the Matrix. It's a you once you break the veil, then you can come back in it in a much more powerful, useful, compassionate, unifying way that we're not able to do if we're caught in it quite as much.
Yeah, yeah, and that to me feels like that synthesis point of, it's not to, because sometimes people can almost, like you said, dismiss it and say, well, it's not real, it's all an illusion. It's like, well, that's great for the person that maybe realizes that it's not ultimate reality, but for the people that are experiencing it as ultimate reality, it is ultimate reality. And it's holding that like tonos, that tension between those, and I think that is like, what's that third point, um
Yeah,
where
it's so true. It's so easy to sound dismissive. Like, even, I feel like Ramana Maharshi has gained influence on kind of spiritual gram and the internet over the last few years. Who was a great guru who died in 1950s. Nisargadatta also, who was chronicled in I Am That, who died in the 80s. Advaita masters of India. If you just read one of their quotes, out of context of their own personage, out of context of those systems, sometimes it does sound kind of cold, to your point. Um, but that doesn't invalidate their level of attainment. To your point, it's like, it was said that Ramana's first teaching was silence.
mm,
And if you didn't get the first teaching, then he would give you something as a secondary, lesser, more pure teaching, which is the phrases that we all have. And yeah, and I mean, I think those systems in general, Advaita Vedanta, it's a sect, or a evolution, if you will, of the Vedantan system in the Vedic philosophy, and there's a really rich ethical foundation that involves essentially interbeing. It essentially involves compassion. It's really like the golden rule, um, devotion to God. There's a lot of kind of more traditional aspects of Vedanta that are the bedrock of Advaita. So if you take just a Pinterest quote from Ramana about it all being illusory without this deeper system of the embodiment of and kind of the dharmic responsibility of the dreamer, if you will. He didn't, for example, he did not tell anyone to go off into the woods and bypass. Um, Essentially, the argument is this, which is if you do say it's all an illusion and you say I have to go off grid and the only way I can make spiritual advancement is by sitting by the creek, for 10 years, uh, which that might be true, by the way, but um, in some ways you're making it real. You're making the unreal real. You're saying I must
Mhm.
change my environment in order to break free of the environment, and that's an oxymoron. That's a contradictory idea. Yeah,
Yeah, of course. If it really isn't real, then you don't have to go anywhere because it's not real.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, then you're adjusting the wrong components.
Yeah, it almost becomes a performative contradiction, doesn't it? Where the very ground of the statement kind of contradicts itself.
Yeah, and I think there's a level of like, how can I say that without shaming people who do need to go into the woods? You
Mm.
know, because I think there are people that I've seen a lot of stuff on YouTube recently around like you know the quitting or the quiet quitting or but people like leaving their jobs. Like there was a really big viral video a few months ago by it was an MIT or he was a very reputable like neurosurgeon in America at one of the like top medical schools and top uh, surgery operation centers, and he left everything. And he said it's another topic, I guess, but he said they weren't the focus actually wasn't on healing; it was on just fixing that thing and charging as much money as possible. Um, but you study for 15 years, before you can do that. And he wound up basically, I think, in a cabin in Alaska with a dog and like a little kind of garden and trying to start a little farm. Basically, it's like this is an extremely intelligent person with a lot of money, with a lot of momentum in the society, and they have said, "No, I'm going to go be Gandalf," you know, and that's very cool and very interesting. And so I don't want to shame that path, but I think conceptually there's definitely something to what we're saying in terms of essentially be where you're needed. Really, I guess that's part of it. Is kind of like the Ram Dass thing. It's like I can't meditate because my kids. Your kids are the meditation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. There's absolutely. I fully understand. I mean, to me, part of that sounds like that's an intelligent person who went from intelligent to wise, which is
Right.
to maybe leave that system and to go and just find that solitude. Because
Yeah.
you know, it in some ways it's kind of like putting on your own oxygen mask first, right? Going
Right.
taking that time just to actually find that balance, especially you've been so deep within the system to begin with. So yeah, again, it's kind of holding the tension between the two. I mean, I was just in Mexico for 12 days, and it felt so nourishing just to feel like that little bit of time out, just in the sun, just kind of
Beautiful. I love
just
Mexico. What part?
Playa del Carmen, like
Nice.
yeah, my brother lives there. He was getting married, so I was there for that. It was beautiful.
Wonderful. I have been to that area a few times. I really don't travel too much, but Playa del Carmen, Cancun are really close to Texas. So we do go there, and I have met a decent amount of British people there.
Yeah.
You guys like the Mayan Riviera. I have drank tequila and sang Shania Twain songs with British men in pools. So respect.
Amazing, amazing.
The
Um,
turquoise unites us all, and Canadians. Canadians go there. You know,
yeah,
we gotta get out of. You guys gotta get out of the cold.
yeah, for real. Like life just certainly feels more doable in the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. Yeah, but then, like we were just saying, then we have to return.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then there's the
Exactly.
return.
Exactly. At some point, is it 12 days or 12 years? But
Mm.
yeah, yeah. And what are you working on? What's going on in your life? I know that you have been close to kind of spiritual coaching and counseling, and you've done a lot of shadow work. How are you showing up these days, my friend?
Yeah, everything feels very full, and yeah, I feel so blessed that just over the last few years, I feel like I've just really deepened with incredible teachers. Um, Mark Gaffney for the last couple of years, and then that's kind of more now transitioned to this year. I've been studying with John Viveki. I don't know if you're familiar with
Mm-hmm.
John. He's a tenured professor at the University of Toronto for cognitive science, philosophy, and psychology.
Oh, wow.
Often guest lectures at Cambridge and Oxford, and um, yeah, like really an incredible mind. And that's actually been really alive for me recently. Is more of this kind of 4E cognitive science, kind of looking at the convergence of um, a lot of his work is really the convergence of like cogsci, psychology, neuroscience, and the spiritual experience. Um, so that's
Super
been,
interesting.
yeah,
What
yeah,
is
that.
what are we learning? It's all connected.
I mean, yeah, yeah, yeah.
The
I mean, there's,
mystics are right.
yeah, yeah. We see that through. I mean, Carl Friston, who's one of the most cited neuroscientists ever. He's based in King's College, University of London. He's been cited over 250,000 times, and a lot of his work is on predictive processing, and the brain is a predictive machine. Um, but then, we really see that people that are more self-conscious basically experience more negative emotion. And then you just go back to deny yourself, pick up your cross, and come with me. And this idea of self transcendence, and then we're just seeing like in the work of Friston about and even neurobiologically like the default mode network, when that's the salience network kind of flicks between um, the frontoparietal network, or the task kind of focus network, and the default mode network, and it almost acts as like a bit of a hinge between the two. And for those where it's hinged more towards the default mode network, yes, which is where that more of the sense of self is located, have higher levels of anxiety and depression, and narcissistic traits and schizophrenic traits, and all of these kind of things, where we literally see neurobiologically how um, that sense of self, where it becomes very much like this kind of deeply egocentric experience of life, and all the negative emotion that comes with that, and a lot of disorders is there. And then again, which go to deny yourself.
Yeah,
So I think
the
it's
ego loves its mind's power and its own special analytical. I mean, the analytical mind, and of course, the miracle is the analytical mind is ego, and that is. And guess what? The ego mind does not like to hear that. So sometimes when you talk about that to people, they go, "Well, but," that's because that's the ego mind reacting to the accusation against it, right? So yeah, you're kind of validating. I mean, that's what we do, Sabri, is we compare notes. But yeah, the beautifully put, by the way, and I'm thrilled to hear that. there's more to this. There's a great book called An Into Upside Down Thinking. I think I reference it in my book. Mark Gober. He's not a scientist. He's a writer, and he's a copyright lawyer of all things. And he, because his specialty was that he did study biology in Stanford, so he's not no dummy. But he said that his work was all about finding anomalies in his work in copyright. And so essentially, he wrote this book compiling. Now he's been a kind of scientific commentator for about a decade now. An Into Upside Down Thinking. The idea behind it is that there's this view within scientific materialism that matter is the fundamental layer of existence, and that there's this pyramid of essentially matter to chemistry to biology to um, animals, mammals, humans, the brain, and then consciousness. And what he says, as well as PhDs like Bernardo Kastrup, Don Hoffman, I'm sure you heard of those guys, who are putting together kind of the new science of consciousness around just keeping the pyramid the same, but taking consciousness instead of it being the last development in terms of the human brain, creating it in the last seconds on the clock, if you will. Consciousness is actually the fundamental layer of existence, and then matters on top of that, and then it's the same progression. But if we essentially what his hypothesis is, if you do that, that resolves this series of anomalies across scientific disciplines. Right? There's all these holes in different scientific into bodies of study that are mysterious, and they are much more explainable. And speaking of Cambridge, Sheldrake, right? He's kind of, I think he's a pioneer. I mean, I think he has his critics, but Dr. Rupert Sheldrake has been talking about consciousness, and like I think his term is like morphic resonance, like the inherited conscious aspects of matter. So yeah, they're all. I mean, to me, it's like the rishis said this 3,000 years ago, guys. I'm glad that you're comfortable now with it. But we got it.
You were saying about, in science, it's good to understand that, the notion of science that we have now is this Cartesian model of science, from Rene Descartes, the kind of European Enlightenment, modernity, and it's really kind of a term that I heard from John. It might be from somewhere else, but I heard it from him. Is propositional tyranny. It falls prey to propositional tyranny, whereas before Cartesian science there was Aristotelian science, and that involved more of a contact epistemology. Like we know more through being in contact, and we've kind of championed the proposition as being the highest form of knowing. But it's who knows laughter better, the one who can explain the propositions of laughter and not laughed, or the one who laughs frequently, who actually knows laughter better. And I think one of the issues with the current scientific model, which I think we're just starting to see like is full of holes, is that it is just about the propositions, and there's a way of knowing that goes far beyond proposition.
Beautifully put. Yeah, it's so true. It reminds me of I think Thich Nhat Hanh did a lot of work with like mindful eating. He did a lot of these things. Did a lot of work with everything, right? But mindfulness and like mindful sensation, mindful eating, and meditation, and he, like describe an orange, right? It's like you've eaten an orange, and you're talking to someone who has never had one. Get it across. Like, good luck. Like yeah. You can use words, you can try to name it all you want, but there's nothing, that's going to come close to the experiential process of it, and I think that applies to so much. It applies to what you're talking about. I think generally speaking too, like within the world of form, there's a level of like imprisonment of the labeling. I just shared a quote from Jane Goodall, rest in peace, Queen, a week or two ago, where she was telling a story about she was in the forest and she said this giant, beautiful fly landed on her arm, and um, she said the mind wanted to say, "Oh, that's a fly, get it off of me," but she was really deep in that mystic forest, down in Alice in Wonderland by herself doing her studies or whatever, and she specifically like tried to let go of that, like because she knew that calling it a fly and saying "shoo, get off of me" puts it in this box, and it's like this is actually a piece of creation, and it's gorgeous too. By the way, it's just sitting here on my arm, and it's kind of perfection in some way, and I thought that was so great because she's like a anthropologist. She's not a Zen master, but that's that's breaking the veil type of thinking. I think she just sat under the trees for enough decades where you have no choice. But we imprison things by having these concepts of them. Not only is the Cartesian model due for an update, I think that it also has negative effects in our kind of connective and expansive potential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Just mentioned the labels there, and actually something that has been a standout word for me this year is learning that in in the New Testament in the Greek, that where it's translated into Jesus of Nazareth saying repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand is actually from the Greek word metanoite.
Mm.
you know Metanoia, beyond mind, and that's quite different. What you just said there about the fly, well, what is it that creates the um the dichotomy, the judgment of what something is? And it's the mind. It's the mind that is creating the label. But what happens when we go beyond the mind? And that has been such a standout. That one piece there for me this year, metanoite, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand.
That's
Um,
fantastic.
yeah.
That's so true. Yeah, and well, that guy has been misread a little bit. Yeah, I heard from a pastor once who I like that soterio is the Greek word for salvation, and it's actually closer to the idea of being made well,
Mm,
for example. But that word salvation in English carries this totally distinct concept for us theologically that
mm,
um, likely wasn't present or is not as prominent. The ancient Jews were interested in essentially change. Basically, they wanted the Romans out of there. It's really that simple. And so, but Jesus was talking about, and so the kingdom coming and the kingdom changing, and so on. He's talking about, in my view, in my humble view, in the mystic's view, the internal state. But it, you know, very quickly on, Paul is getting political. The early church fathers are getting political with it. So that's why those terms are so loaded, because they are 2,000 years old. But the question is how proximate to the master, right?
well, I think it's said in Luke 17:20,
Yeah,
right?
that's the banger.
Yeah, when asked about the coming kingdom of God, or it's like it's not going to be there it is or here it is. It's within your midst.
Well, and that's a great. Thank you for bringing that up. I actually have a chapter in my book called "The Kingdom Within, Not Among."
Mm-hmm.
So so the line is, the kingdom of heaven is within you. And in the 70s, when the NIV came out, the New International Version and the New Living Version translations came out, 60s, 70s, which are now the standard. The NIV is in most churches in English countries. And the translation is typically, the kingdom is among you, is how it's read now in English. And Christian apologists see that and say, he was being self-referential. He's not saying, no mystics, no Hindu wannabes. He's saying the kingdom of heaven is among you, aka me. I'm the kingdom, baby. And it's kind of their funny little like, nuh-uh. And so in my book, I reference the work of an Aramaic scholar, a Syriac scholar, Ilaria Ramelli, I believe, PhD. And she did extreme research on that word in Greek. It's intos. I can't tell you the Greek letters. I'm not a Bible scholar, Sabri. I'm a student of Bible scholarship. I have a bachelor's, but I don't know Greek. Anyway, I read the people who know. And she did extensive research on the original versions, and that word intos appears in other places in the New Testament and the Old Testament, and it's always used to refer to the inside. The clearest representation of it elsewhere is when he says, um, "You must clean the inside of the cup," as opposed to the outside. So he's talking about the inside of the cup physically, and it's the same word. So that's how we're able to draw the connection. Whereas there's another word for among, like there's another one in the Old Testament, like among wolves, and I give the examples anyway in my book, and it's like nope. So anyway, just from a little nerdy academic point, he really is saying inside of you, I'd say the Lucan author. Let's be historical here. The author of Luke, who's outside of the Jewish homeland, who has less. Luke's gospel is for the Gentiles. Essentially, it's not. Mark and Matthew are much more Jewish. They're written in the Jewish homeland, whereas the Lucan gospel is pretty clearly not in ancient Judea. It's outside of that, and so it's not perfect either, but it's important to understand that nuance.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm right to say that the Luke, Mark, Matthew, and Luke are considered the synoptic gospels, and then
Right.
John, maybe written 70 years later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as early as 100, could be as late as 120.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
yeah. I mean,
after he died.
I feel like if anyone actually reads the Sermon on the Mount, even though just the Beatitudes, and actually really contemplates them,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how it can't be perceived as mystical.
It's right there in the Gospels. He says, one of my favorite lines too is he says, if thine whole eye be single, your body will be full of light. And, I don't think Christians know what the hell that means. I mean, most good Sunday goer. I'm sorry. I love my Christian fam, and there's great Christians, obviously. And some of the greatest human beings of all time have been Christian, by the way. However, the current state of modern American Christianity, which I am not involved with, I'm a mystic heretic on the outside. It seems like there's a level of unwillingness to admit that he was teaching non-duality. That's a non-dual teaching. If your eye is single, your whole body will be full of light. It's kind of like, don't worry about that one. Let's focus on the resurrection and what Paul wrote.
It's
like, no, he's saying
Paulianity.
Right. I'm loving that momentum. I'm seeing that on Instagram and YouTube, and there's been a couple of commentators kind of helping me push that narrative, which is very, very real. It's very grounded in scholarship.
Yeah.
Super influential.
that's probably been another thing for me this last year, is just really connecting to the teachings of the Nazarene, of
Yes,
Jesus of Nazareth.
highly recommend.
Just the you know again the Sermon on the Mount. I just feel like, so my American friends. I hear there's a thing in Texas with the Ten Commandments,
Mm-hmm.
in schools, and I did wonder. I'm like, why not the Beatitudes?
You'd think that that would be the one they would emphasize. Yeah, I don't know if you saw this. I made the national news, Sabri. A friend of mine texted me because I have a side project that is about teaching meditation to school teachers. So we work with. We're in a couple of schools now. I'd like to be in more, but anyway, it's a kind of side project, solid enough for me, teaching meditation for the last 10 years. And anyway, we built this program for schools. So I talked to a lot of principals, and we're trying to it's kind of like an MBSR for school teachers. And a buddy of mine knows this, and when that came out, he knows my work. And when that came out, he said, "You should design posters of the other religions' doctrines and precepts and sell those to teachers and schools, now to be put up as a resistance kind of thing to the Handmaid's Tale state legislation of our very backwards government right down the street from me." And so I did, and so I've sold 100 or something, decent amount, but nothing crazy. But anyway, somehow NBC News reached out to me and said, "Hey, I saw your post. Would you want to talk to us about it's SB 10? It's the legislation." And so I get a couple of sentences in like an article about this happening and kind of the reactions to it. It's very strange. I mean, it feels like we're sliding backwards in some ways, or it's a pendulum reaction of like the fear of those groups. Maybe it's more of a death rattle probably, but it's still a concern because it's an act of legislation. The ACLU is fighting it right now in court. But anyway, to your point, it's fascinating because it's like, how interesting that we're going to emphasize the Old Testament jealous God demands, from the Torah, by the way. I mean, with what Jesus contradicts in some ways. I mean, in Matthew he's the fulfillment, but in Luke and John he's more at odds. Matthew's gospel, he elevates Jesus as the new Jewish hero, right? It's complete fulfillment. It's perfect prophetic hero character in Matthew. By the time we get to Luke and then John, Judaism is essentially irrelevant to his attainment. So the four gospels themselves have this extreme variety on that relationship. But yeah, I mean, it's like, how about his 2 commandments, which I make a poster of, by the way. So the posters are the 10 Great Commandments, the 4 Noble Truths of Buddhism, the yamas and niyamas of Hinduism, the 5 Pillars of Islam, the Eightfold Path of Buddhism, which is fantastic, and then the 2 Great Commandments, sometimes it's called, by Jesus, because he's asked, what are the commandments, right? And he famously says, love God with all your heart, soul, spirit, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's it. That's all you need. Just love God and love other people very deeply. And so I made that one. Yeah, that was in a few classrooms.
and how beautiful,
Yeah,
how beautiful.
yeah, yeah.
The two commandments to love, and like he says, and the 2 are kind of the same.
Totally, yeah. There's a lot of, they're essentially the same teaching. Yeah. If the divine is in everything.
Again, which is very much that non-dual.
Non-dual.
Yeah, it's that, and it. Brilliant. Yeah, for people just listening, Rob just held up a coffee cup that says, who would Jesus bomb? Yeah.
Being sassy with my mug
And
selection.
that's the thing. I think people, when you can, when people consider like the radical nature of some of the things that Jesus said for the time, Jews and Gentiles alike, everybody deserves a seat at the table of my Father in heaven. When at a time where the Jews saw themselves as God's chosen people, and other than to have this person saying things like that, which again is this no, there's no separation in that way.
Yeah, exactly. Directly, he says, "Love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you," which is radical. And
Yeah.
frankly, we're not doing it now, and we're not doing it 2,000 years later. Love your enemies, let alone in the Iron Age, when it's a far more brutal and violent world. It was radical then, extremely, and it's still radical today. I write about in my book about how he uses the image of the Samaritan in an extremely powerful way. I mean, one of my professors at UT, by the way, University of Texas Hook'em Horns, one of my professors said that the reason we're still talking about Jesus now is not because of this kind of, not because of the religious connotations of him saving the sins of the world or kind of what Christianity later created years after him, but his initial popularity that has sustained him comes from his uh, radical juxtapositions and teaching style. So, for example, I'll give you the shortest version I possibly can, which is the parable of the Good Samaritan, which is one of my favorite parables. You probably heard it or familiar with that term. A lot of hospitals are called Good Samaritan and so on. But this is the story. It actually comes after the second greatest commandment, where he says, "Love your neighbor as yourself." Um, a man who's not a disciple essentially challenges him and says, "What do you mean by neighbor? How do you define that?" And he says, "It's like this. A man was walking along on the road to Jericho, and he was robbed and left for dead. A Jewish priest walks by the dead man, or the seemingly dead man, and not only does he not help him, he crosses the road and goes on his way." And that right there is insane. I mean, no wonder this guy got killed. I mean, that is such a radical anti-establishment thing to say, that the priest of your own religion wouldn't help the injured traveler. A Levite is the second person in the story, who's kind of like a priest's assistant, does the same thing. He sees that the man appears to be dead, and he crosses uh, the road. And the reason they're doing that, by the way, is because there was a very important theme in ancient Judaism around cleanliness, and kind of touching a dead body in, I believe it's Leviticus, but one of those Old Testament books. It was bad. It was bad news. Essentially, there would be repercussions for you, and there'd be repercussions for your community by having close proximity to a dead body. So they know that, and the audience knows that, and the Jewish priests essentially don't help the man. And this is a Jewish rabbi telling the story. The third person who comes along is a Samaritan. So the Samaritans were neighbors to the Judean province, and there was a fierce rivalry in that there was a war with the Samaritans, with Samaria, a couple centuries before Jesus' time. So Jews and Samaritans were not cool. In fact, in John, I believe it's in John, I can't remember, he's called a Samaritan. The Pharisees call him like a dirty Samaritan as an insult to Jesus. They're like, "You fucking Samaritan." So it's like a slur. That's how it's in the Bible. So Jesus says the Samaritan comes along, he picks up the man, puts him on his donkey, takes him to an inn, and he even gives the innkeeper 2 denarii, which is a lot of money. So the Samaritan is either rich or he might be a tax collector. which adds to the fun anti-ness of the whole story. And he said, and tells the innkeeper, he says, "He had to heal this man. Whatever you do, if you spend all this money, I'll be back tomorrow and I give you some more money for this." A stranger. And Jesus says, "Who did the right thing?" Essentially, who treated the man like a neighbor? And the audience says, "The third person." They actually don't even say the Samaritan, Jesus. They say the third person, which could imply textually that they were even unwilling to admit that the Samaritan did the right thing in his story, as opposed to the Jewish priest. So it's a freaking radical story about inclusivity. To your point, it's about how religion and institutional doctrine can make you rigid, essentially, and prevent your humanness, your humanity, by being blind to the needs of the other person. They're just frameworks. They shouldn't be constrictions. They're foundations. But what essentially what happens in these faith traditions sometimes, in the exoteric faith traditions, is they just become so constrictive, and the avatar, to use that language, the avatar is just gonna destroy it. It's just going to. The avatar's attainment just undoes the wooden surface level buildup of the system.
Yeah. Earlier this year, I was kind of taking more of a look into the Eastern Orthodoxy and just seeing how the differences between Eastern
It's kind of
Orthodox.
trending right now.
Yeah, and the difference between
For
that and
good reason,
Catholicism.
by the way. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, and it was really fascinating just to see the differences, and also some of the text they have. Like I downloaded the
Enoch.
Philokalia,
Mhm.
which Philosophia, love of wisdom. Philokalia is the love of beauty, and it's one of the primary texts is the Philokalia, and just very deep and kind of philosophical, and I thought that was really interesting. But the idea that they hold that there is something to be done. It's not just believe in this figure that Jesus, almost like like a Santa type figure, like I believe. But like the more of a fasting practice, and this year for me, um, throughout the Lenten period, I decided just to eat once a day, and I mean it
You're a
was.
big guy.
Yeah, reasonably. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I ate once a day, and wow, I mean, I experienced such transformation through that fasting practice, just eating once every 24 hours. And what was beautiful is, and I was every morning I developed a really deep prayer practice and just reading the Gospels, and I just really wanted to be close to the figure of Jesus, and this idea of kind of go through that Lenten period. And just really being with the Beatitudes and really kind of then asking the questions, like, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It's like, okay, where in my life am I being rich in my own spirit? Where in my life am I not emptying of spirit to be filled with the Spirit of God? Where in my life am I not being pure in heart? Where in my life am I not seeking to make peace? And just kind of actually then being in this like reflection and contemplation, and just in the Beatitudes, it's like if just those alone are followed, again, blessed are the meek, but to understand meek to be calm in the chaos. Where am I not showing up to the chaotic situations calm and able to follow instruction? So much there. And towards the end of the fasting period, I was 2 days out actually from Easter. I'm out with my daughter, and I'm thinking, okay, like a couple of days time, I'll go back to regular eating. And then I I just heard the whisper: if somebody forces you to walk with them 1 mile, walk with them 2. And I just paused, and it just came through like a like a lightning bolt. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
huh, am I meant to double this? And I just really kind of, it just almost like a revelation of, if this practice is truly to kind of go beyond ego, to kind of realize how much, you, when connected to God, that you can be held, that you can be guided, that you don't, and also to be in non-resistance to what is.
Mm-hmm.
If you truly are in non-resistance to what is, are you willing to do double that you are asked? I was like, huh, okay. So I said yes. I ended up doing double the amount of time. I think I did close to 90 days. But my point was is, actually being in the practice, like reading the teachings, and then like, okay, let me see how I can actually live this.
Yeah,
So transformative.
it's beautiful.
And yeah, and then I ended up, kind of going back to more of a regular eating cadence. But then about 7 weeks ago, I started again. I just thought, no, this was such a beautiful practice. I just want to go back to that once a day.
That's great. Yeah, that's good. That's good advice. There's a Carl Jung quote. He says, "If you know and don't do, you don't know." So yeah, I really like that. I think there's a lot of like, you know, rubber meeting road right now, and it's kind of like, it seems like the books, admittedly, like the books have been a practice for me. I think I was reflecting on this recently. Like, I am a nerdy mystic encyclopedia. Like, it is what it is. I've read a lot of books, and I'm not trying to, whatever. It sounds weird to say that, but it's true. I'm a huge fan of the world mystics. I have kind of lived reading their lives and teachings animates my heart and spirit, and validates some of my intuitive feelings about things in the world, and yet at the same time, to your point, it's like you can't just disregard what they're saying in your own life. Okay, book's done. Done with meditation. Here we go. All right, time to go take advantage of a bunch of people. No, you can't. You have to establish that level of like writing out the energy into your life, or you're a big old Pharisee. Is what Jesus had issues with with the inconsistent friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, by the way, funny asked if we want to talk gospel caveats from my book, which I'll just give you the short version. But the Pharisees in the Bible, who are kind of like, if you're listening, you're not familiar, the Pharisees are essentially the televangelist preachers of Jesus's day. They're walking around the cities with their big, look at me, performative kind of religious authority. And what happens is, and Jesus essentially calls them out for, he has this great teaching, like, for example, where he says, if you're fasting, like Sabri, um, don't, he says, wear bright, colorful clothing, basically. Um, don't do like the Pharisees, where they wear tattered rags and, oh, look at me, everyone. I'm this great ascetic fasting and, give me alms and adoration and so on because I'm this amazing spiritual adept in my fasting journey. I don't know. Wear clothes that actually hide what's happening because it's just for you and God. And God will know what you're doing and you'll be more aligned with them and so on. And it's a beautiful teaching. And it's like, it's relevant for Instagram. It's still relevant for the world. And the caveat is this, Avery. So there's a really great book. I don't know if I can grab it fast enough, but it's called Gospel Parallels, and it's a reference Bible of the New Testament Gospels. And essentially, it's what scholars look at. So it's called It's called vertical reading and horizontal reading. So, horizontal reading in Bible scholarship is where you read it in church, A to Z. That he was born in the manger, he's died and resurrected. They all sound kind of the same if you read them front to back, but in um, Bible scholarship, it's called vertical reading. So, they'll take the same event, if it exists in multiple places, that some, you know, there's a wide swath of events that are only in one, only in two, three. Very few are in four, almost none. But anyway, the condemnation of the Pharisees is fascinating because he, and this, uh, we can come back to it, but around like condemnation and judgment, um, he essentially calls out the Pharisees as being hypocrites in Mark and in Luke, but he's very brief. It's very short. It's a couple of lines, basically. In Matthew, he goes on and on and on and on. I mean, it's pages, and you can see it. It's kind of comical in Gospel Parallels. It's like paragraph, two paragraphs, 2 pages. Well, why is this? So the author of Matthew, again, he's writing in the Jewish homeland, and what happened was the temple was destroyed. So in Mark, there's all this talk about the temple being destroyed because Mark was written immediately after the temple falls in Jerusalem in 6970 by the Roman army. So in the 60s, essentially the Jews push the Romans out and they take the city back. They're a province of Rome, but there's all this kind of, it's a powder keg. The first century in ancient Judea is a powder keg. They don't want to be ruled by the Romans, but they are. There are these guys called the Zealots walking around with blades, and essentially it's Assassin's Creed kind of stuff. And they kick the Romans out in 67. The Romans come back, and it's not good. And in 6970, the Romans siege the city, destroy it, and they destroy the temple, which is the main building of the Jewish religion. It's where God is. And Christians, most Christians don't know this, Sabri, so that's why I just keep megaphoning this in a redundant way. And if someone's listening to me on podcasts, I'm sorry that I'm talking about Herod's temple's destruction all the time. But it's very important because the temple is destroyed in 6970. Essentially, the priestly caste of the temple is killed. And immediately thereafter, you're left with two primary sects of Judaism: the Pharisaical Jews and the Jesus following Jews. And they're totally at odds. And so this is the environment in which the Gospels were written, particularly Mark and Matthew. And Matthew's Gospel, he's so much more antagonistic to the Pharisees because the author of Matthew is trying to convert people who are on the fence to their system and embolden his hero character to call out the other sect. It's extremely political, and it's a damn shame because the Christ consciousness, the being of Jesus, never called anyone whitewashed tombs. Matthew, he says, "You whitewashed tombs, pretty
Brood of
on the
vipers.
outside, but bones on the inside. You den of vipers." And Jesus didn't say that. Okay, that's only in Matthew because of the tense political climate in which they were existing. He does
Fascinating.
call out hypocrisy, though, in a gentle way, because it is worth just being discernment about that he's not a jerk.
Yeah. There's a difference between discernment and dichotomy, or like being able to discern. And I think that sometimes this is
Absolutely.
one of the things that some people, again, maybe more on the spiritual path, might kind of struggle with the idea that discernment is not like ontological judgment, or like saying that this thing is not the same, like has a dichotomizing its ontology, rather than we can still make a discernment though. We can still
Right,
clarify.
right, right. There's still right and wrong things to do within reason in life, without
Yeah,
without calling everybody dirty sinners.
yeah. There's for people that don't know, at this point, we should say that you have a book, Original Sin is a Lie. And there's, in case people aren't aware, and we spoke about this more on the first podcast that we did, but there's something that I've been thinking about this, and I want to throw it your way and tell me what you think. I was thinking, just my own contemplation, what might the original sin be, if if there is original sin? And so let me throw this in the air, and you can catch it. So both in Greek and Hebrew, sin is an archery term for missing the mark. Now in Genesis, there's this idea of eating from the tree of eat from the tree of life, yes. Eat from the tree of knowledge and evil. Don't do that. And where I've got to is this kind of how it lands in me is this eating from the tree of life is the one. It is the non-dual, and the knowledge of good and evil is the dichotomizing of taking the position of like the mind that knows. And it feels like to me, if there is an original sin, the sin is of the mind that wants to dichotomize and create the duality. And the moment that happens, the bit that's really interesting to me is that the first judgment is self-judgment around nakedness, and then it's shame. And that, I mean, the depth of how that points out to the human experience is like the moment you start judging, the first thing you judge is you inherently judge yourself. You then feel shame around yourself. You actually can't judge it outwards without judging self, and then there's that hiding from God. So the thing that I was in contemplation, that if there is original sin, the original sin is the mind's proclivity to want to think that it knows what is, you know, good or evil, um, which then cascades downwards to this like this self judgment and the shame, rather than like a return to like the the tree of life, uh, the non-dual, something
It's a
like
great question, and I'm so glad you brought it up. And I think it's really important to talk about the distinction too, because yeah, like you said, my book is called "Original Sin is a Lie," and it's called that because I don't believe that we are inherently dirty. The mystics certainly don't believe that, and I'm a student of the world mystics, and that's my lineage is the world mystics, the poets, the drunks. The heretics. Those are my people, and that's why it's called that. But to your point, in there's a great book that I love called *A Course in Miracles*, which is very popular, and uh, I'm not sure you're familiar with it, but I'm would imagine you are in some capacity. And it was, it was intuited. I prefer that term than channeled. Channeled sounds kind of weird and magical or something, but everything is kind of intuited, music and art, painting. Anyway, it was a document that came out in the 70s. It's a very good spiritual self-study curriculum. There's no religion, it's just a path, and it's very similar to, for example, Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta. It's a pure non-dual philosophy. It's uncompromising. It's also 3,000 freaking pages. It's a lot, which is useful for some people. It does describe the cosmology of the dream. So there's this other quality in non-dual mystic philosophy, which is that this world is a dream. It's actually real. And again, that doesn't mean to not help ease suffering, but anyway, it's a dream. And essentially, the cosmology of a course, I think, is the most detailed, but has Gnostic and Advaitin overlap, which is that there's essentially you have seemingly two entities, God and Christ. So God forever was is and always will be. The Christ is not different than God, but if there was a difference, is how it's framed. If there was a difference, it would be that God created Christ, right? So it's kind of creator and child of creator. The child of creator essentially has the thought, what would it be like to go off and play by myself? And that's the Big Bang. So the creation of this universe is the false dream of the what a course calls the tiny mad idea of what would it be like to be separate from God. So I think if there isn't a quote unquote original sin, it's it's actually what's kind of also sometimes considered the split mind. The first split of the mind is consciousness, and so that's that eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge. I actually warmly disagree with you. I think that eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge was the descent into duality, and I use the word descent purposefully in that that is what creates the split mind of consciousness. That's what creates the the dual polarized nature of this world, which can be transcended, and in most mystic philosophy actually already has been. Papaji wrote a book that's called "Nothing Ever Happened." There's this idea that the dream was just a snap of the fingers. We're just deluded in the dream's continuation, but it's actually already over. We've already woken up. I know that sounds far out, but essentially the point is don't be disheartened because you're actually at home. We're at home in bed dreaming, and the waking up process is actually just remembering who we truly are, which is to be within God's love unconditionally and eternally. It's inescapable, actually. Your God's love for you is you can try all you want, but you can't get rid of how important you are to God. But I do think, yeah, there's the Gnostics kind of talked like this. The Gnostics talked about the kind of erroneous that Plato has some non-dual qualities to his systems. Plotinus, certainly the Vedics. The Sufis call it a dream. Rumi calls it the guest house. Come in and come out. We're all leasing. There's this. It's a transitory. It's a false world, and I think that the creation of it has to do with what you're talking about in original sense. So it's a funny, I guess, nuance to my book title. And I don't want to. I think Augustine, Saint Augustine is wrong. We're not originally sinful. Babies don't need to get baptized, so they don't burn forever if they die. I don't believe. I think that's created by the church, created by controlling figures. However, we did seem to think that we could separate from God, and that's absurd, and that's what creates the absurd world.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I understand your title to be around the kind of more original, like kind of, well, the Christian notion of what that means versus like my inquiry was like, well, what might it be? And I guess I don't know if I
It's a
articulated this
great
right.
question. I've never been asked it, so thank you.
Yeah, well, as I was saying, I don't know if I articulated it in the right way, but I think more of what I was trying to get to was more about the eating from is almost like identifying as the mind, like
Yeah,
ontologically to identify as the mind is the missing of the mark. That's how I've kind of
yeah.
that's where I landed to. Like, if it was it, what would it be? And I feel like it would be that identifying as the mind, the
Yeah,
which
what you were
then
saying earlier
is the
about
metanoite.
yeah, and what you were saying earlier around the folks who are most in their mind and are the most beset with all these challenges mentally, you know, uh, dealing with kind of mental disorders and the challenges in the mental health space come from extremely self-conscious people. It's no surprise to the mystics.
Yeah, and one of the other very interesting things, you mentioned all the references to like the dream and about like things not being real. But again, within predictive processing and Bayesian theory, these very kind of scientific models of the brain, there's something called active inference, which is effectively like we aren't really experiencing reality. We're predicting most of what we actually see. We're not seeing. The mind is filling in.
Mm.
And what we do is um, we have a generative model of what we believe reality is, and then we find examples of what we see to map onto the generative model that we're predicting. And actually, what we tend to notice are prediction errors or violations of what we were predicting. And but then, other than that, we're mapping on what we're expecting to experience. So, and then this makes a lot of sense how two people can experience the same thing objectively, but then subjectively have a very different experience of the same thing because they're mapping that onto the uh, generative model and the beliefs they already have about so rather than it being projection of I'm projecting my beliefs onto that, it's more I'm taking that and putting it onto my beliefs.
Absolutely. Yeah, isn't that useful to see that everyone is just seeing what's happening through their own lens of their own experience? And what you're making me think of there, for example, is like, I've been sharing online for a long time, but I've got some momentum in the last couple of years. And
That that's been great to see, by the way.
oh, thanks, man. Yeah, it's been
Yeah.
it's been fun. Writing, and I was telling two painter friends of mine the other night because they were going, we used to just have to paint, and now we have to paint and share the video of us painting and talk about it, and post pictures of. And I was like, well, I'm sorry for painters and musicians because you guys, it's not your medium, but I'm a filmmaker and a writer, so it's like, this is a writing video. And anywho, the book title original says lie generates responses, and for better or worse. And I've got some critiques, um, some of which were lower IQ pals, and some have been more intelligent critiques as well, admittedly. But regardless, anyone who's coming at you online who doesn't know you and doesn't know really anything about you except a 40-second video, they are suffering. They're actually, I mean, I think what this is kind of sounds egoic, I guess, in some ways, but it's like, people who are hating on you on the internet, especially if you're just trying to be a nice person, just help people, they're having a miserable life. They work at a fast food. They're a manager at a fast food restaurant in a suburb of a small town, and they have the internet, and so they can see the Kardashians living in mansions. Now we have this awareness of the socioeconomic inequities, and so but without the lived experience of it, so many people in the world that it's creating this antipathy, and so there's just so much anger and depression out there that if you are making something that you are getting uh, critiques from that, having some sense of empathy for the person has been really useful. There's a Thich Nhat Hanh quote, who's the Yoda of everyone, um, certainly one of mine, where he says, "If someone makes you suffer, um, he doesn't need correction; he needs help
Mhm.
because he's suffering deeply." I've even seen like other like creators or whatever. Like sometimes they'll be like, "God, I'm getting railed," or "This is so hard," and blah blah, blah. And I'll just send them that. Like there's a little Thich Nhat Hanh like Pinterest picture of that. I just send that, and they're like, "Oh, thank you. You're right. These people are hurting," and so yeah, we're all just coloring the world with our own viewpoints and past karma. behaviors, and
Yeah.
so on.
And and when you say that, I just hear "forgive them for they know not what they
Yeah,
do,"
no
right?
kidding. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Remember, the New Testament has just about everything you need, friends.
you know, about a decade ago, which was the first time that I drank ayahuasca. Um, One of the very early on in the journey, I was presented with these. I'm laying there, and the only state altering substance that I'd had prior to ayahuasca was alcohol. So that was
You
my
jumped in the deep end, then, brother.
that was my gateway,
You
and
didn't wade into the water. You jumped off the diving board.
jumped on in. Yeah, yeah, and so I'm starting off with all of the kaleidoscopic visuals. I'm like, okay, it's happening, and I'm laying there and I see these two demonic entities. I'm like, oh, this isn't nice. So I open my eyes and they're still there, which is even worse. It's like, oh no, the dream doesn't stop.
Mm,
And
there you go. That didn't help. We're still here.
the the thing that I thought, my go-to thing, as a lifelong martial artist, was like, got to fight these things. So all of a sudden, I'm in this like arena where it's like an arena ready to fight these two demons.
Mm,
And then right before it began, it's like I just noticed what I could see that I made them appear demonic was their pain.
mm,
And the awareness was, oh, I don't need to fight these, I need to love them. And in that moment, I just kind of went from this to arms open, and they just went, and they just kind of evaporated away. And then there's like a narrative that said, like, whenever you see anyone that appears to be demonic, it is you're seeing their pain, and that pain comes from a time when they needed love and didn't receive it.
mm. That's
Love
beautiful.
them.
Yeah, gosh, it's beautiful. Yeah, he. I mean, allegedly, the centurions who he forgave became his followers.
Mm.
Right, the men who speared his body later became devotees. Yeah, that's really beautiful, Sabri. Thank you. There's a monk named Milarepa who I am obsessed with, and I'm just a billboard. I'm a commercial for the masters. That's all. Don't listen to me. Just go to where I'm. I got a nice reference list, and he was a Tibetan Buddhist yogi who he's known as the mountain yogi. And I had heard his name. Ram Dass will tell a story of his. I had heard his name before, kind of the hippie counterculture who was reading him, but he's not really that popular uh, in America, widespread in the Western world as he should be. So I'm happy to be like an evangelist of him. He's born 1,000 years ago. I won't give you his whole story because that's enough. We'll save it for another pod.
Just say his name again, Bob.
Milarepa, Milarepa. He's from the Kagyu lineage in Tibet, which is Mahamudra is the technique. Um, and he studied under Marpa the translator, who was a famous um, Lama in his own right, who studied under greats in India like Naropa, Tilopa lineage. Um, and then what happened was Marpa brought the text back to Tibet and was translating Sanskrit into Tibet. And the Muslims were attacking the Buddhists, and so some of the Buddhists went to Tibet, and you can chill in the mountains. And so, anyway, Milarepa is this. He has this incredible story, and I won't go in. We're getting close to the end here, so I'll save it for next time. But he's in the mountain caves meditating. He ends up after he learns the teaching from Marpa. He spends over a decade or so in the snowy peaks of the Himalayas. So not only is it a miracle that he survives as a human in that environment, he also breaks the veil when his students believe he became a bodhisattva or Buddha or Christ. He became. He's done. He's fully cooked. And there's many stories of him meditating in the caves some of which are physical and some of which are supernatural. And one of them is the five demons. And there's five demons that appear as he's going out to gather. He sometimes he's depicted as green because he would eat nettle soup. Uh, like he just there was no food, so he just looks like a ghost. The hunters come and they're like, "Oh my God, it's a ghost!" And he goes, "No, I'm just a monk meditating. Hi, how are you?" He's just this incredible figure. Anyway, he comes back and the demons are in his cave, and they're terrifying. And he starts preaching to them. He starts preaching the Dharma, and that doesn't work. And then he starts being compassionate to them and trying to empathize with them, and that helps. And some of them start to disappear. And then there's the biggest one is still there, and he doesn't know what to do. And it's the scariest one. And he walks up, and he just realizes that it's all the emptiness is the wholeness. And it's all nothing, and it's all everything. And he just surrenders, puts his head in the demon's mouth, and disappears. And so, but that's really beautiful because it's you had a Milarepa moment of being confronted by demons in the astral, and how do you react to that? The initial reaction versus the resolution. So anyway, deep bow to Milarepa and to your experiences. I think that you're really doing some beautiful work, and glad to maintain the connection with you, my friend.
Yeah, thank you, brother. It's great to connect with you again, and just for you to share all that you do, and your enthusiasm for the mystics, and for really, to me, what feels like a commitment to goodness, truth, and beauty. The three transcendentals.
Okay. Thank
That's
you.
Yeah,
Yeah, Plato was right. Those are three good things to emphasize.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, the mystics are really the way out. I think they are. I think they're needed more than ever. Sometimes the image I use is like the mast of a ship. It feels like the modern world is so chaotic, and the storm is just, we're about to be shipwrecked. Is what it feels like all the time. But the mystics, I mean, the divine, because the mystics are just mirrors to the divine. But the human stories are kind of my like masthead that I'm just holding on in the storm. They can solidify. They can help us solidify in times of you're reading the Gospels. You're reading that's a damn good mystic. He's one of the best. I'll never say he's the best. By the way, sorry Christians. I've read Milarepa. Sorry I've read Krishna. Sorry I've read all about the Nepalese prince, um, who we didn't bring up really, but he's as good as it gets too. I've read a lot of these women and men throughout history, and they're all find yours kind of thing. I think that's kind of one of my pieces of work is like, oh, you have a Christian background and you want to go deeper into that kind of great. You can get everything you need from the Nazarene. And if you aren't into that, you know, there's a handful of really good. Sometimes Buddha might be too cold for people. Okay, try Rumi. Rumi's really warm. Rumi's like an oven, you know. So there's subtle variations, but I think that my enthusiasm for the mystics, to borrow your phrase, is rooted in that, real value that they provide amidst the craziest times we've seen yet. So good luck, everyone.
yeah.
You
And
got this.
just very quickly, just to link onto that, one of the things that John Viveki talks about is um, spiritual pluralism, and the idea that we can make use of Zen practice within Christian teachings, and the idea
Mm,
that we can actually adopt a spiritual pluralism where um, it's not to kind of like create a homogeny, but how we can look at, what is the warmth from, uh, you know, the Sufis that can then also be incorporated into the teachings of Buddhism, or like what are the things where there's a true they truly complement each other to deepen in the embodied knowing, um, and
Yeah,
connection.
absolutely. Yeah, there's a great saint too named Ramakrishna, who's from India, middle 19th century, and really his life sadhana, his followers consider him an avatar. I mean, I do too. He went through all the paths basically. He studied a variety of Hindu paths. He was a child of Kali, was his path in Hinduism, kind of his upbringing and his final path, but all in between. He tried various different versions of Hinduism, including Advaita, and he also practiced Islam and Christianity for a time and kind of validated them all. He has a lot to say about this stuff. He says, he does say, which I do agree with him about this. I agree with both of you, but essentially, I think that there's like this exploratory period where you are reading everything, or you are kind of being exposed across the map, and I think that there's a lot of people that haven't done that yet. Um, Maybe that's from could be from kind of conditioning around no. I mean, a lot of American Christians tell me, oh, I was forbidden to read the Buddha.
Mm.
I mean, and it's like, so part of my job is going, you should probably just thumb through the Dhammapada, and just watch your heart light up at how this is just a sword through the veil. So there's an exploratory period that I encourage people to. But Ramakrishna also says, who was the king of exploratory periods, says a shallow well won't get the water. Many shallow wells won't get the water. So, but one deep one will. So I do think that there's kind of a phase two where you do hit the path or the book or the teacher or whatever it is that resonates. Then you use that one to really go deeper. And maybe that one is a few years or 10 or 20, and then you get exploratory again. I don't know. It varies, I think, for each individual. But I think it is, there's a pendulum like swing of it to be exploratory and deep. So, you know, that's my take on as we stumble through the Milky Way.
Beautiful, brother. Where can people find you best if they want to connect?
Yeah, I am pretty regular on Instagram and TikTok. Bob Peck is my name. The book is my life's work so far. It's called Original Sin is a Lie. It came out a few years ago. I'm working on some new things. There is a second book idea. It's coming. There's no release date for it. But I am working on kind of some tools and programs related to all this, I think, as the craziness ratchets up. So hopefully we can all do our part and love our neighbors or whatever. So thanks, man. Thanks so much, and like I said, appreciate your work as well, and glad to sustain the connection.
Yeah, thank you,
The
brother.
Atlantic can't keep us apart.
It certainly can't. And yeah, highly recommend the book. I didn't read it. I listened to the audio. The audio was great.
Oh, fun. Thanks.
Um, yeah, so highly recommend. Highly recommend it.
Thanks so much, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, brother. Look forward to speaking again.
Likewise.